financial investigations. You follow, quote unquote, you follow the money. If you were investigating this and looking at $5 million payment from Burisma to Joe Biden, what kinds of information or patterns would you be looking for?
Well, I'd want to know who, what, when, where, and why. What's going on? Why is the money moving? What's it for? What's the substance behind it? And talk to people. Look at documents and talk to people. That's what we do in investigations. I would venture to say everybody in this chamber, if they were the CEO of a company and they saw money moving like that within their own company, they'd want to get to the truth. They'd want to find out, why is that money moving? Why is somebody paying that money out? Those are the questions that need to be asked and get to the bottom of.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman, I have another unanimous consent request. I'd like to enter into the record a July 9th, 2016 letter from 3 Burisma board members, including Hunter Biden, to Yuri Lutsenko, who replaced Shokin as the prosecutor general, expressing concern that Mr. Lutsenko had initiated an investigation into Burisma.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair recognizes Mr. Kassar from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to begin with a quote. The people of America elected all 435 of us to do the things they expect Congress to do. Real business, not theater. Try to have some type of prescription drug reform legislation this year. But instead, the majority party is conducting baseless impeachment hearings. Who do we think said this quote? Was it Nancy Pelosi? Maybe Ranking Member Jamie Raskin? Mr. Chairman, you might recognize that quote because you said this in 2019. You said it on the floor of the U.S. House, saying impeaching Donald Trump was political theater. Trump was first impeached for attempting to extort a foreign president into helping the Trump presidential campaign. And if you didn't consider that criminal, how about when Trump was impeached trying to overthrow the results of the presidential election and then incited a violent insurrection against the government? So if you thought that impeaching Trump was political theater, then what would you call this? This is a disgrace. And I hope that someday top Republican officials will find some integrity. In the case of Trump, because you fear his social media wrath, right-wing officials will deny all evidence against Trump, come hell or high water. But in the case of President Joe Biden, you decided to start the impeaching now and figure out the whole evidence thing later. And you still haven't figured it out. Your own Republican-called witnesses today say they don't see the evidence to impeach President Joe Biden. Bunch of stuff about Hunter this, Hunter that, but they've said they don't see the evidence to impeach Joe Biden. That is a disgraceful double standard. It damages our democracy, insults the institution of Congress, and more than anything, disgraces this body in the eyes of the American public. This inquiry is a cynical attempt to tar everyone, to make everyone look suspect, make everyone look corrupt, so that voters just give up and say, there's not much difference here. But we cannot give up on discerning truth from propaganda. We cannot give up on our collective governance. Congress is a place where historically people of enormous integrity have throughout history taken on big challenges of inequality, injustice, instability. We can and must impartially look at the evidence before us and have equal justice under the law. And the evidence before us shows no wrongdoing by President Biden. We haven't seen that evidence throughout the testimony today. Your own Republican-called witnesses have said they haven't seen that kind of evidence. There is separate evidence that supports indictments, unrelated indictments against his son, Hunter, and multiple indictments spanning 91 criminal charges against former President Trump. I, for one, am grateful we have an independent judicial system where a president's son or a former president like Trump can be investigated and prosecuted if they violate the law. It is my firm belief that Hunter and Trump should both face trial and, if guilty, be held accountable for the crimes they've been accused of. Can everyone on the Oversight Committee say the same thing? Will members of the Oversight Committee please raise your hand if you believe both Hunter and Trump should be held accountable for any of the indictments against them, if convicted by a jury of their peers? We can take a minute. No, it's serious. This is a serious matter. If y'all need to think about it, we can take a moment and think about it. It is serious. This is very serious. Think about it. Should both Hunter and
will the
Trump
gentleman yield to a
be held
question?
accountable? I want to see whether you'd raise your hand. Should Hunter and Trump both be held accountable if they're found guilty on any of their indictments? Raise your hand if you think that equal justice under the law applies and scary. This double standard insults the institutions of Congress that people fought and died to build. This impeachment hearing clearly is not about justice. We cannot say equal justice under the law for everyone except for the guy who holds the leash. I'll yield the rest of my time to Ranking Member Raskin.
Thank you. I think as you were being interrupted by several colleagues, I heard one question posed by the distinguished gentlelady from Georgia who said, what about the January 6th defendants, all of whom had lawyers, due process, the presumption of innocence, and they were convicted of various things, including assaulting federal officers and metropolitan police.
What about
as well as
Antifa
Capitol
BLM
Police.
rioters
point
and
of
$2
order.
billion of damage
Mr. Raskin,
in
if I
America?
can take my time back.
Yes, I'll yield
We've
back.
heard, because it wasn't on the microphones, multiple members saying it's wrong that January 6th rioters were convicted by a jury of their peers. That is disturbing. We've started to get used to it, but we can't get used to it.
Gentleman's
It's scary.
time has expired. Now, Chair recognizes Mr.
Chairman, point of order.
Perry.
Point of order.
Chair recognizes Mr. Fallon for a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to enter the 1020 FD 1023 into the record.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes Mr. Perry from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In an attempt to establish some patterns here and get to the actual facts out, the media won't report. The president's son seemed to benefit often from government positions. As far back as 1996, he refused his first job at MBNA. Then Senator Joe Biden had supported the controversial bankruptcy bill, which really favored the company to the peril of average citizens, and he got the name Senator for MNBA. After which Hunter then, he continued to benefit from his father's public positions. And in 2011, he was contacted by Che Fang, who's a Chinese politician and businessman. They wanted to form a joint investment firm that then became a subsidiary of the Bank of China. Now, it seems like the president's the president's son's only skill is leveraging his family name. It essentially seems like it comes to him like swimming comes to a fish. If we could put up on the screen an email from between Devin Archer and the president's son. And if you can see here where he's asked, why does the super chairman love me so much? And the answer is, it's easy. It has nothing to do with me and everything to do with my last name. That's the president's son. That's not me saying it. That's the president's son. He openly acknowledged it doesn't come from education or business acumen. It comes from his name. And let's face it, it is his name, but it's not his name that was garnering all the attention. Both were selling their name, one to MBNA and the other to the highest bidder. Devin Archer, in his transcribed interview, if you'll put that on the screen, please, he confirmed it. If I can get Mr. Archer's testimony on the screen. Well, while it's getting up there, because the clock's going to.
It's not up there.
Biden family, he confirmed it and said the Biden family was the product or the brand. And it's fair to say, in quotes, that Joe Biden was the brand and obviously brought most value to the brand. I make that case because the president's son was addicted to drugs and he was frequenting prostitutes, so I suspect his value of a brand was pretty low compared to his father, who was the vice president of the United States. I mean, companies brand their products, whether it's a food company or a car company or shoe company, they brand it because it provides trust by their buyers or from their buyers. Now, this committee first released a bank memo on March 16, 2023, that showed that less than 2 months after the vice president left office, State Energy HK Limited sent Robinson Walker, again, a very close friend and business associate of the Biden family, $3 million Shortly thereafter, literally the next day, and within the next series of days, Robinson Walker sent over $1 million to the Biden family and associated businesses, and they were sent in suspect incremental payments. And it follows a pattern. I can give you other instances where the exact same thing occurred. 1/3 for Robinson Walker, 1/3, 1/3 here, 1/3 there. That's how it worked out. Now, the Biden family provided no legitimate services, yet Hallie Biden, reportedly working as a school counselor, was provided some of this money. For what? What was the product or what was the service? Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into record the first bank record memos dated March 16, 2023, new evidence resulting from the Oversight Committee's investigation of the Biden family's influence peddling and business schemes, showing that the Biden family members and Biden associated businesses received over $1 million from State Energy HK Limited, a Chinese company.
Without objection, it's ordered.
Thank you. Mr. Turley, thank you for being here. What is influence peddling?
Influence peddling is to sell access or influence to an office holder to achieve some end. There's sometimes a very clear quid pro quo, which is a specific act that you want. Sometimes it's a general pattern of corruption of favoring someone. I actually, in my testimony, gave I believe it was the Canadian definition, which I thought was a particularly good one under their law. But the United States also signed off on a convention on public corruption that also has definitions that are relevant.
Mr. Dubinsky, in the remaining time, this money, these wires are being sent to family members with no apparent legitimate services being rendered.
Chairman,
Is this something that you would find interest in and would yourself, if charged with it, would investigate on your own?
Gentlemen, time's expired, but please answer the question.
It would be a red flag, and I would follow up on that and see where it leads.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a point of order.
Take your point.
I didn't want to interrupt the distinguished gentleman from Pennsylvania, but he referred to an email at the beginning of his testimony. Have we not been provided a copy of that email, and I don't know where it came from. What is the source of that material? The
source of the materials from Hunter Biden.
Hunter Biden sent it to the committee? Hunter Biden sent that to the committee? Because, we have a rule on this. We've got to be provided all material that's going to be entered in the record. Our colleagues keep relying on emails that are purportedly obtained from Hunter Biden's laptop, but we have no idea if those emails are authentic. As you know, you've not shared with us what you say is the hard drive to Hunter Biden's laptop, and nobody's verified them. And the guy,
CBS has verified them. The CBS News did a forensic audit, said they're legitimate.
Mr. Chairman, I
CBS
ask
News is
unanimous
not part of
consent
this
to have
committee.
the email entered into the record.
Well, but then I'm going to
Without
object to it
objection.
because we don't know what the basis of that is.
We'll
And we
work
had
on getting you an answer for that.
If I could just
All
say,
right.
the computer repair guy who disseminated that stuff says he cannot account for the chain of custody of the alleged hard drive of the laptop. So we have no idea where that comes from.
And we'll get you the answer to that, but I would
Please.
like to remind the ranking member that the president's son is now suing the repair guy for leaking his laptop. Remember, he denied it forever, and you all
But he
said it
can't
was
account
Russian
for the
manipulation.
custody.
Now it's
Right. No, I agree with you, but he can't account for the custody of it either.
we'll,
Nobody knows.
We'll get
what's
you the
been put
answer
in
on
there.
the source of the email. Chair now recognizes.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record our own 2023 transcribed interview with our committee of Devin Archer, where he clearly states, quote, the brand
It's already
was
in the
Washington,
record.
D.C., not President Biden. He was asked, the brand was really Joe Biden, and Mr. Archer responded, D.C. was the brand.
Without objection to order, it's in the record twice now.
Well, I guess it's a reminder.
So Chair recognizes Ms. Crockett from Texas.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Before I begin my questioning, I want to remind everyone that the information recorded in the FBI Form 1023 that my Republican colleagues keep citing is not evidence of anything. This form reflects years-old, secondhand, unverified information from a Ukrainian oligarch as relayed to the FBI by a confidential human source. These unverified secondhand allegations have been repeatedly debunked and undermined, including by the confidential human source who relayed this information to the FBI. The tip recorded in the Form 1023 was thoroughly explored by the U.S. attorney handpicked by Donald Trump, which was Attorney General William Barr, and the assessment was closed. Finally, Devin Archer, Hunter Biden's former business partner who worked with the Ukrainian oligarch in question, told this committee in a transcribed interview in July that he had no knowledge of any such payments allegedly described in this form. Repeating the same lies will not somehow turn them into truths. Kind of like the election that Trump lost. Say it with me, he lost it. Repeating the same lie that he won wasn't going to turn the election around. The lost in this chamber keep pushing lies and lunacy on behalf of a multi-time loser. So if we're going to talk about China, let's go ahead and talk about China. And let's talk about the dealings. And let me point out the fact that right now, each of you has admitted that none of you are fact witnesses. We walked in without facts, and unfortunately, because what we say isn't necessarily evidence, we have wasted the American people's time, and we are going to walk out of this chamber, and we still have no facts that are leading to anything. But let me give y'all a little bit of tea while we're here. So I have a document that I will ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record. It's a fact sheet on President Trump's shady business dealings with the Chinese government.
What are you entering in? A record from who?
This is from the Congressional Integrity.
Congressional Integrity Project, the dark money PAC?
I object.
I object to that too.
Of course y'all gonna object, but we gonna talk about it. So it says Trump has extensive financial ties to the Chinese government. President Trump collected millions from Chinese government-owned entities while in office. I have the best tenants in the world, President Trump was well aware of the multi-million-dollar lease to Chinese interests. President Trump promised to donate foreign government profits while in office, but he donated less than a third of his proceeds from the Chinese government. President Trump maintained 3 foreign bank accounts while in office, including one in China. President Trump's business with China raised legal and ethical concerns. President Trump, President Xi, loves the people of China. He loves his country, and he's doing a very good job. Let me tell you something. I don't want to talk about what y'all want to act like is some big mystery, because we keep sitting here, and Professor Gerhardt, just to be clear, as my colleagues have even tried to provide evidence, which they're not the ones to provide evidence, have you ever heard them say if, since we've been sitting here for I don't know how long?
Yes, I've been taking a tally.
Oh, okay. Can you show us? Can you tell us what the tally is?
More than 35 times, the Republican witnesses and Republican members of the committee have used the word if.
Thank you so much for that. Because honestly, if they would continue to say if or Hunter and we were playing a drinking game, I would be drunk by now. Because I promise you, they have not talked about the subject of this, which would be the president. But let me tell you something that was so disturbing as I walked in to this chamber today. As I prepared, I said, what is the crime? Because when you're talking about impeachment, you're talking about high crimes or misdemeanors. And I can't seem to find the crime. And honestly, no one has testified of what crime they believe the president of the United States has committed. But when we start talking about things that look like evidence, they want to act like they blind. They don't know what this is. These are our national secrets. Looks like in the shitter to me. This looks like more evidence of our national secrets, say on a stage at Mar-a-Lago. When we're talking about somebody that's committed high crimes, it's at least indictments, let's say 32 counts related to unauthorized retention of national security secrets, 7 counts related to obstructing the investigation, 3 false statements, 1 count of conspiracy to defraud the United States, falsifying business records, conspiracy to defraud the United States, 2 counts related to efforts to obstruct the vote certification proceedings, 1 count of conspiracy to violate civil rights, 23 counts related to forgery or false document statements, 8 counts related to soliciting, and I could go on because he's got 91 counts pending right now. But I will tell you what the president has been guilty of. He has unfortunately been guilty of loving his child unconditionally, and that is the only evidence that they have brought forward. And honestly, I hope and pray that my parents love me half as much as he loves his child. Until they find some evidence, we need to get back to the people's work, which means keeping this government open so that people don't go hungry in the streets of the United States. And I will yield.
Chair recognizes Mr. Timmons from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to try to simplify this for the American people. My colleagues across the aisle allege that this inquiry is improper and that this hearing is improper. but that could not be further from the truth. We now have enormous amounts of evidence indicate that Hunter Biden was engaged in nefarious and illegal activities with foreign nationals from China, Romania, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Russia, all while making millions of dollars doing so. We don't even know the full extent of it yet. To date, we've discovered up to $25 million in payments, and that's without even having Hunter Biden's personal bank records. The question is this, though. This is the question. This is why we're here. What did Joe Biden know and when? Due to the evidence that we've found to date, Speaker McCarthy appropriately initiated an impeachment inquiry to give us additional tools to get the answer to that question. Based on the circumstantial evidence we have, the laptop, the whistleblower, shell companies' bank records, and testimony from Devin Archer, this Congress has a duty to further investigate whether Vice President Joe Biden was an affable, loving father, simply taken advantage of by his delinquent son, or a knowing participant who was complicit in the scheme and financially compensated for his role. That is why we are here today, to answer that simple question, to determine if our current president is compromised. Look, this scheme is complicated, all these countries and all these different roles different people played, but the plan is simple and repeated often. A foreign client has a problem. The foreign client pays a Biden. The vice president leverages influence to force favorable outcomes for the client. The Biden family earns their fee. That's the scheme. We've seen it played over and over. As we continue to investigate all of this wrongdoing, I've put a lot of time trying to figure out how all this got started. In 2014, it seems that Vice President Biden, after 4 decades of public service and thinking he would never hold public office again, started down a slippery slope. Perhaps he just wanted to help his struggling son. Maybe he never intended to sell policy decisions and for the Biden family to get millions of dollars. But there's mounting evidence that suggests that that may very be what has happened. It all began in the spring of 2014, though. Hunter Biden gets his father to have dinner with foreign nationals and his business partner, Devin Archer, in Georgetown. The foreign nationals attending this dinner were Karim Masimov, the Prime Minister of Kazakhstan, Kenes Rakishev, a Kazakhstani oligarch, Yelena Baturina, a Russian oligarch who also happened to be the wife of the mayor of Moscow. We know that beginning in early 2014, Baturina sent a $3.5 million wire to one of Hunter Biden's shell companies, and Rakishev wired $142,300 to yet another shell company for Hunter Biden to buy a Porsche. We have the bank records to prove this. So the logical question here is, what was this money for? What were the goals of those payments? For Baturina, it seems, her motives were clear. She knew that Russia was going to invade Crimea, and as a response to the invasion, the Obama administration would inevitably announce sanctions and visa bans. Who's left off the list that the Obama administration published? Who was noticeably missing? Yelena Baturina, the richest woman in Russia, the woman who wired Hunter Biden $3.5 million just days earlier. That's just a coincidence. For Rakishev, the motive was to leverage Biden's influence to aid in the facilitation of the sale of Kazakhstani state oil rights to Burisma. And guess what? In December of the same year, Rakishev's oil company and Burisma joined a Chinese Communist Party-linked company and announced a deal. Everyone got rich. Again, another amazing coincidence. These are only the first 2 of dozens of examples of the scheme. A foreign client has a problem. A foreign client pays a Biden. Vice President leverages influence to force a favorable outcome for the client. Biden family earns their fee. Our work over the last 9 months warrants additional scrutiny of Biden family members and business associates and requires additional tools at our disposal to uncover whether Joe Biden was complicit. Again, the purpose of this investigation. Our next steps are to subpoena additional documents that will give context to these transactions to help determine Joe Biden's culpability. We're going to subpoena Hunter Biden's personal bank records, various business records such as invoices and contracts to clarify what these payments were for, Secret Service logs detailing movement patterns of then Vice President. The list goes on and on. And again, I just want everybody to remember, we're doing this because the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the IRS refused to do their job. And we have evidence just in the last week that they're actively concealing these possible crimes. If we discover that Joe Biden was taking half of Hunter Biden's income, like Hunter told his daughter in a text message, I hope that my Democrat colleagues will put politics aside, do the right thing, and join us in impeaching a corrupt president who sold out the American people. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Goldman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This hearing is entitled The Basis for an Impeachment Inquiry. You would think that after 8 months of an investigation, we would not need to have a hearing with no witness who has any direct knowledge of the evidence to determine that there is a basis for this impeachment inquiry. And this is an impeachment inquiry. Mr. Turley and Mr. Gerhardt testified in 2019 in the official impeachment process in the Judiciary Committee. The inquiry was in the Intelligence Committee. And in the Intelligence Committee, there were 17 firsthand witnesses with direct knowledge of the allegations. And the public hearings had 12 witnesses, all with firsthand. Here we are in our first hearing. No one has any actual knowledge or evidence. There's nothing new here. So why don't we have some of the fact witnesses here? You've brought them in. They've come in already. What about Devin Archer? Now, Mr. Donalds and the chairman now want to disavow Mr. Archer's testimony that Mr. Biggs entirely relies upon, but they don't want him to come sit here. Why? Well, maybe because he testified that Joe Biden never discussed business with Hunter or other business associates, he got nothing from their businesses, and he never took any official acts related to the businesses. Or maybe the American people might hear that this $3.5 million from Batterina actually had nothing to do with Hunter Biden, which is what Devin Archer testified. Or what about Eric Schwerin, Hunter Biden's partner and accountant? He also performed a number of administrative and bookkeeping tasks for then Vice President Biden and Hunter Biden. He saw President Biden's bank accounts, and he told the committee that he was not aware of any involvement by President Biden in the financial conduct of his relatives' businesses, much less any transactions into or out of then Vice President's bank account related to business conducted by any family member. And the list goes on. We've already talked about Lev Parnas and Rudy Giuliani. The reason is you bring in the fact witnesses and your case goes down the drain. So let's talk about what your allegations are. $15 million to 9 Biden family members from 2014 to 2019. Mr. Dubinsky, was Joe Biden president of the United States from 2014 to 2019?
No, he was not.
And in fact, from 2017 to 2021, he was a private citizen, right?
That's my understanding, correct.
Mr. Gerhardt, am I correct that the framers made very clear that conduct as private citizens are best left for the legal system, not the impeachment process? Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Now, even yesterday, in releasing 700 pages of documents, Chairman Smith admitted that he's not an expert in the timeline, which seems to encapsulate this investigation to a T. Because here we are seeing texts and emails from 2017. We're seeing Department of Justice emails from 2020 when it was the Donald Trump Justice Department. And all we hear all day long, Biden family, Biden family, Biden family. And every time you hear that, you know that it doesn't include Joe Biden. If there were 9 Biden family members who got money from these business transactions, isn't it striking that Joe Biden was not one of them? Pretty remarkable. And what we hear is this is an exceedingly complex chain of transactions. That's what the House Republicans said. Pattern of incredible financial complexity. Ms. McClain showed a chart. It had an investor, it had an investment company that invested money, that received money, and then it went to the investors. Mr. Dubinsky, that's not very complicated, is it?
Well, that's not really the question. The question is, what was going on there? Was there an investment?
I'm just asking about the structure.
Well, that's
because
structure,
what we have here, and we hear so much about services and all of this, services are legitimate or product. It's an investment company. It's a private equity company that invests capital in other corporations and companies. That is standard practice.
Well, that's an assumption.
Mr. Turley, you said in 2019 that impeachment requires a clear criminal act. Is that right?
No, in fact, in the Trump impeachment, I said repeatedly, you can impeach someone for non-criminal conduct. What I said then, I'm saying now, which is I strongly encourage you to look at criminal acts.
All right, well, that testimony is there.
But
no, you can't, because I have 10 seconds left. You have said that lying as a president is not impeachable. You have said that there's an influence peddling campaign, but you will acknowledge, will you not, that in order to have a criminal act of public corruption or bribery, there must be, under McDonnell, an official act in connection to some sort of personal benefit. Isn't that right?
Gentleman's time's expired, but Mr. Turley, please answer the question.
Yeah, I can just point you to my testimony. I talk about quid
Just
pro
answer the
quo.
question.
Because it's a little more complex.
No, it's not. An official act for a personal benefit.
All right. Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes Ms. Green from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On July 25th, 2023, Chairman Comer and I sent the Department of Justice a letter requesting information related to victims of Hunter Biden, specifically women he sexually exploited and then claimed as deductions on his taxes through his law firm. But he never paid those taxes. Not surprisingly, the Department of Justice did not respond. After the DOJ's sweetheart Hunter Biden deal fell apart, by the way, led by the special counsel David Weiss, on September 8th, 2023, Chairman Comer and I again sent a letter to the same DOJ officials asking about victims' rights issues related to Hunter Biden's sexual exploitations. DOJ once again failed to respond. Well, yesterday I found out why they don't want to talk with us. In a new email just released, by the way, from October 2020, could you please display the email? The Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office, DOJ, Tax, FBI, and IRS described evidence they have related to Mann Act violations. By the way, the subject of the email says Mann Act. First, the title, Mann Act. Then it's clear there are charges on the table while the Department of Justice is in hiding from meeting with me. The Department of Justice and IRS email and David Weiss's Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office, the email states there are communications with trafficker number 1 and trafficker number 2, and that Hunter Biden had escorts who traveled across state lines. These women are victims, and the Department of Justice is refusing to protect their rights. Not only that, David Weiss, the now special counsel in charge of supposedly investigating Hunter Biden, has been clearly covering up Hunter Biden's crimes since before the 2020 election, which is undoubtedly election interference. David Weiss is complicit and must be removed from the special counsel. We also have more information we subpoenaed. Let me give you an even better example based on an interview with one of Hunter Biden's victims with law enforcement. It says here that the victim, Hunter Biden's victim, stated that Biden told her that his father was the vice president and asked to Google search his name. Hunter Biden's victim stated she told Biden she was not interested in Google searching his name and just wanted to be paid. Hunter Biden's victim stated that Biden then showed her a picture of his father with President Barack Obama. Don't forget his father was vice president then. Hunter Biden's victim stated after she was shown the aforementioned picture, who was the vice president of the United States with the president of the United States, Barack Obama, she became afraid. After Hunter Biden's victim left the location, she arrived back at her apartment and told her friend, who she was just with, Hunter Biden's victim stated that her friend told her, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." These women were terrified, terrified. He used his father, Hunter Biden used his father, the vice president of the United States, to threaten his victim, who he had just trafficked for sex. And the Department of Justice refuses to speak to me? Hunter Biden needs to be held accountable for his sexual exploitation of women. And we've shown more evidence. We've shown evidence. This is what it looks like. This is what Mann Act violations look like.
Mr. Chairman,
I reclaim my time.
I'd like to challenge the use of this
Hunter
exhibit
Biden
under
should
Clause
be
6
held
of Rule
accountable.
17.
It is sad that my Democrat colleagues
Point of order.
pretend to care about women's rights while allowing Hunter Biden to exploit women. This is a shame. But let's talk about.
Chairman,
let's
there's
go
a
little further.
parliamentary challenge before us.
The point of
Mr.
order.
Chairman, point of order.
Who's the point? And we'll stop the clock for you, Ms. Green.
Mr. Chairman, our colleague from Georgia has introduced before pornographic exhibits and displayed things that are really not suitable for children who might be watching. And
Bathing suit's not suitable, Mr. Raskin?
Well, I'm saying I would like the member to be instructed to not introduce any pornography today, at least without running it through
A
the chair
bathing
first.
suit is not pornography,
Well, we
Mr.
can't see it
Raskin.
from down there, so you didn't make it available to the minority before you
I've
started.
seen it before. It's
Okay.
on the internet. It's everywhere.
You are submitting a naked woman's body.
This is a bathing suit. This is a bathing suit.
And it has not been cleared before this committee.
All right.
Glasses on. Do you wear them
Okay.
or not? It's a
I have
bathing suit.
contacts in, thank
Oh,
you.
congratulations.
All right. Chair, ask Ms. Green to proceed.
Now let's talk about more evidence the Democrats have denied that's turned out to be true. We all know Joe Biden is the big guy. We confirmed that Hunter Biden was lobbying his father. Here's another example that was just released yesterday. This is from a timeline from one of the IRS whistleblowers and quotes an email between Vuk Jeremic, a Serbian politician, and Hunter Biden. Did you have a chance to talk with the big man? He's receiving my prime minister on Wednesday. Please let me know if you think that what we discussed back in D.C. can be mentioned in the meeting. My domestic strategy, how I proceed in dealing with my government, very much depends on whether it happens or not. This is a conversation between Hunter Biden and Vuk Jeremic. This is called influence peddling. This is how Hunter Biden was selling his father's political power and influence. And this is a perfect example. This is evidence right here. I'd like to remind everyone that this is the beginning of the impeachment inquiry, where we're casting a wide net and finding every single person, whether it's last administration, the administration before that, and whether it's the current administration, that has covered up the
Chairman, point of
crimes
order.
of the Biden family, and we will continue pulling more
We're
evidence
54 seconds
forward.
over, Mr. Chairman.
And I'll let Mr. Goldman go over 30 seconds. So we owe you 20 seconds to Mr. Moskowitz. It's your lucky day. You get 5 minutes and 20 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's your lucky day. What a day we are having here, isn't it? Right? I mean, listen, as a former director of emergency management, I know a disaster when I see one. I mean, by the way, you don't believe me, just ask Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon, your guy, just went on and said, perhaps...
Who's guy, Steve Bannon?
Yeah, well, you know who Steve Bannon is. Steve Bannon just went on and said perhaps the Republicans shouldn't have started with a witness. He was talking about Professor Turley, who was going to say right off the bat that there wasn't an impeachable offense. I quote, he says, perhaps we should have put him on the maybe list for one of our witnesses. So your other witness, Ms. O'Connor, gave a complete recitation of the last 9 months, 8 months of these hearings. She went through some of the greatest hits that have come out, right? Everything that has been presented, both in these committees that we've been having, on TV, all of the evidence that you guys have been presenting over the last 8 months, all of that together. And what does Professor Turley say? It says everything we know at this juncture doesn't rise to the level of impeachment. Boy, that is awkward. It's like political impeachment malpractice. But look, let's go back at some of the previous comments that my colleagues have given. So the chairman, and I have a slide, the chairman goes on Hannity, right? You guys all know Sean, you appear with him on Fox News all the time, right? And Hannity asks a softball question, right? This is a total softball. Do you believe that this is now officially the Joe Biden bribery allegation, and do you believe you will be able to prove it? The chairman should have just said yes, but nope, he says hope so, because he doesn't have any evidence, couldn't say yes, right? Next slide, please. Then we have Senator Grassley. Grassley says what we all know out loud. We aren't interested in whether or not the accusations against Vice President Biden are accurate. Chuck, we know. We know you're not interested in the truth. Next slide, please. And then Donald Trump, he's giving it all away. We know he likes to show his cards. He says, I think had they not done it to me, perhaps you wouldn't have it being done to them. And this is going to happen with indictments, too. So, Donald Trump, the tough guy, right? What is he saying? He's teaching the lesson we all teach our kids, right? If they do it to you, go do it back. So look, we're all appearing now in the world's worst acted TV drama, right? It's been picked up for a second season, the Real House Republicans of Oversight. Perhaps the material's so bad due to the writer's strike. I mean, how many Republicans, Freedom Caucus members, part of the Chaos Caucus, have said there's no evidence to impeach Joe Biden? And again, of course, we know it's not about the evidence. Why? Here's a list of all of the articles of impeachment that have been filed by my colleagues, some that are on this committee. When was the first article filed? It was filed in January of 21, 2 weeks after January 6th. So before we had a single hearing, before they went through this myriad of phishing, they were filing articles of impeachment. Professor Turley, you said this doesn't rise to the level of impeachment, and you said they shouldn't prejudge. Well, here's a list right here of every single member, many on this committee, prejudging. They're filing articles of impeachment. COVID, Afghanistan, Hunter Biden, and they're all one-upping each other in the Donald Trump Friend Olympics, trying to get invited to the sleepover at Mar-a-Lago. Oh, I filed articles of impeachment against Merrick Garland. No, I filed articles of impeachment against Kamala Harris. Okay? It is ridiculous. But this is what this is about. Let me show you. It's a simple board, right? So all other presidents in the United States, 50% of the impeachments. Donald Trump, the other 50. Donald Trump has half of the impeachments in American history. But you know what? He's got 100% of the indictments. 100% of all indictments. 0 for the other presidents. Listen, let me do it another way. I want to channel my inner Tim Russert. So let me go to the board, right? And I don't have Florida. But Donald Trump, impeachments. Oh, how many impeachments? We got 2 there. How many indictments? We got 4. How many for Biden? 0. Donald Trump is right. He's sick of winning. He's just winning, running away with it. And that's why we're here. We're here because of math. That's what this is about. They can't save Donald Trump. They can't take away the 2 impeachments and the 4 indictments. But they can try to put some numbers on the board for Joe Biden. But the problem is when you sling mud, you got to have mud. And they just don't have anything, Mr. Chairman. So look, we get it. We know why we're here. That's why they say the Biden family, the Bidens, James Biden, Joe Biden's dog, Commander, but not Joe Biden. Never Joe Biden. So when are you going to have the vote on impeachment, Mr. Chairman? What are you scared of? Call the vote. Come on. If you all think there's so much evidence, we're here. Call the vote on impeachment. Impeach him right now. I dare you.
Gentlemen, time's expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Gosar for 5 minutes.
This time, Chairman the CEFC of China Energy. Who is Chairman Yi? Chairman Yi and CEFC reportedly had connections to the Chinese military. Though it was in theory a private company, CEFC has layers of Communist Party committees, which are usually staples of state-owned enterprises. This CCP-affiliated entity was closely connected with China's Belt and Road Initiative, and there's evidence Joe Biden was in business with it. Joe Biden was engaged so closely with Chairman Yi and CEFC that he planned to share office space in Washington, D.C. with him. Joe Biden was actually considered a partner. Let's break down the evidence. The email I have on display shows on September 21st, 2017, yes, we'll talk about that in a minute, Hunter Biden emailed the general manager, House of Sweden, a building in Washington, D.C., to request that keys be made available for office mates Joe Biden, Jill Biden, Jim Biden, Gong Wendong, Chairman Yi's CEFC emissary. Not only did Joe Biden share office space with the Chinese Communist-affiliated CEFC leadership, his son, Hunter Biden, asked that the signage for the venture be listed as, quote, the Biden Foundation Hudson West, CEFC US. In case it isn't clear that Joe Biden wasn't a partner in these business dealings with CCP-affiliated entity with a key to shared office space, the email I now have on display shows that Hunter Biden specifically referenced Joe Biden as his partner in this venture. Hunter even shared the personal phone numbers for Joe Biden, to whom Hunter Biden refers to as his partner, along with Gong Wendong, Chairman Yi's emissary, and Jim Biden. The management was told to call Joe Biden if they chose. CEFC Chairman Yi additionally gifted Hunter Biden a diamond worth $80,000 during their business relationship. Chairman Yi was detained in 2018 by Chinese authorities. It was initially reported by Chinese media that his detention in China was ordered directly by Chinese President Xi Jinping. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent at the end of the record this email dated September 21st, 2017, showing Joe Biden's involvement sharing of office space with his family CCP-linked business partner, Chairman Yi Ying-ming.
Without objection, so ordered.
Now, let me ask you a question. Who do you think I'm referring to? Who has a family of high-ranking government officials receiving tons of money, cars, and luxury items from a foreign government? You might have said Senator Menendez, and you would be right. But Hunter Biden also received those same things. Mr. Turley, in your experience, is it concerning that a public official such as Joe Biden is involved with the CEFC, China Energy, a company with ties to CCP, and Chairman Yi, who was later detained by China for fraud?
Well, it's certainly a concern that some of these individuals have been either accused of or has been convicted of fraud, including one by the United States government. The question is whether that conduct extended to the vice president or the president today, and whether that's part of a continuum of conduct.
Mr. Dudinsky, when you see a pattern of problems, particularly in corruption, doesn't that pattern usually continue? It's a cover-up. Do you agree with that statement?
I do. We call it pattern evidence, and that's what we look for when we're doing investigations, to see what's continuing in that regard.
So if you were started prior as a vice president, we would continue through this as a private citizen. You'd see it also as a president. So those would be aspects that you would follow through, right?
Absolutely.
Now, for all three of you, real quick. The other side has said over and over again, you've given no information. But isn't it true that we should be looking to you for establishment? I'm not an attorney, neither are a bunch of these folks here. Shouldn't we be utilizing your expertise to go get that information to make sure it's valid? Mr. Turley, would you agree with that?
I agree. My testimony tried to lay out the historical baseline for an inquiry. This is just the beginning of that formal inquiry.
Ms. O'Connor?
My testimony was to aid in understanding what the whistleblowers had brought forward.
Mr. Dudinsky?
And my testimony was centered around conducting an unbiased investigation and getting to the truth.
See, unbelievable. I think this is just so perfectly set up. We wanted the very basis of this, and we wanted a slow, methodical, make sure it is done appropriately. You know, it just overwhelms me when we start to see the rhetoric that comes out of that side, and especially the show that we just saw. You know, that belongs on Saturday Night Live. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, a unanimous consent motion, or request, rather. I would like to enter 6 different instances of the Devin Archer transcript.
And it's been entered twice, but if you want to enter it again, go ahead.
Yeah, well, there are 6 ones where he said that all they discussed was the weather.
Yeah,
and
look,
never business,
Mr. Coleman, we'll enter in the whole entire transcript for the 3rd time.
Thank you.
Without objection to order.
Mr. Chairman,
recognizes Ms. Tlaib from Michigan for 5 minutes.
Before she starts, I'd like to ask for unanimous consent to enter a October 23rd, 2020 Wall Street Journal article that states, text messages and emails provided to the Journal by Mr. Bobulinski don't show either Hunter Biden or James Biden discussing a role for Joe Biden in the venture.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair recognizes Ms. Tlaib.
Mr. Chairman, just before also, I'd like to enter into the record on behalf of Congressman Crockett all of Donald Trump's indictments, and so I'd like to also enter those into the record.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes Ms. Tlaib.
Thank you so much, Chair Comer, and of course our wonderful ranking member Raskin. It is great to be on this committee, and when I first came in, I looked up on the wall and saw our incredible former chair of our House Oversight Committee, Elijah Cummings, and it reminded me of our first meeting, our first committee hearing here in this chamber. I can tell you it was incredibly powerful. I don't know, Mr. Turley, if you know, do you know what the subject matter of that hearing was?
I don't.
It was around insulin, price gouging of insulin. And the first witness was a mother of twins who had to ration her insulin between the 2 children. It was incredible because at that moment I thought this is exactly the committee I want to be on. Here doing, what is needed for the American people in fighting back against, greed and a number of broken systems and processes that I think, again, leave many of our families behind. But here we are, though, doing the bidding of a twice impeached, indicted former president instead of working for the people of our country. Mr. O'Connor, 47,395. Do you know what that is, Ms. O'Connor?
I don't know what number you're referring to.
That's the number of active duty reserve men and women serving our nation's armed forces in Kentucky who's going to be forced to go without pay because of the shutdown.
And I should know that because?
No, it's because you have nothing to say about any of this because you're not a fact. You don't have any facts. You weren't there. So, Ms. O'Connor, don't take it personally.
I'm not a fact witness.
Ms. O'Connor, don't take it personally that you are here being used for somebody out there being indicted. This is not helping the American people. Mr. Gephardt, what is this here over here? What does this say?
Well, one thing I'm learning in these hearings is I need new glasses. But that's the countdown to the shut.
That's right. What is it? What, a couple days here?
2 days and 8 hours.
So, Mr. Dubinsky, do you know who said the following? We had thousands of members across the country who returned holiday presents because they needed cash, missed a mortgage payment, took out a short-term loan, and ran up their credit card debt because they had no paycheck for the month.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
State your point. And stop the clock for Ms. Tlaib.
Thank
State
you,
your
Mr.
point.
Chair. I appreciate that.
All government employees are going to get paid at the end of this month. And also the Democrat Party forced
That is not
shutdowns
true.
on the American
That is not
economy.
true.
It's okay.
Reclaiming order.
Forcing people to lose their jobs. Kids behind in school.
It's okay.
That's not a point of order.
You know what?
All right.
That's going to be not true on October 1st.
Hold on.
I know,
Chair
Mr. Chair,
recognizes
but we
Ms.
can't allow
Tlaib.
people to be misleading the American people. We all know. I was here. I was here in 2019 when the shutdown was there for 35 days. Because you know what? You do know who said this?
I lost track of the
I know. Doreen Greenwald. She was a member of the National Treasury Employees Union. She said 150,000 workers in 35 agencies. She said this is the irresponsible 2018-19 Republican shutdown from the previous administration. Do you know she also went on to say, because this is important, this is what this committee should be used for. She went on to say they stood in line at food banks, pulled their children from childcare, were unable to put gas in their cars and begged creditors for grace. This is not how the United States of America should treat its own employees. That is verbatim from a federal employee that did not get paid at last shutdown. So let's not lie to the American people. Right now, the Department of Agriculture will be forced to stop processing housing loans, which provided over 675 million people and 3,431 families in rural North Carolina. That's all going to stop. The Department of Ag would be forced to stop processing a loan in Wisconsin, about $181 million loans that are impacting rural Wisconsin. Small Business Administration, y'all, would stop processing small business loans, halting over $284 million in funding small businesses in Alabama. That's just one state. The federal government shutdown has real consequences. I would like to submit, Mr. Chair, to the record, FEMA funding would be impacted if the government shuts down. This is in regards to the impact in Florida specifically if the government shuts down, and the impact on the many, many humanitarian aid that has to go to many homeowners that were impacted.
Without objection to order.
In my district, 56,000. Do you know what that is? That's a number of children that will lose their child care spot, the spot to receive child care. State, countrywide, is 3.5 million children impacted. This is how many children, again, our caucus, Republicans, are literally just putting aside and saying, no, we're going to do this instead. We're going to go and bring the campaigning, the ugliness, toxicity that our families don't need right now into this chamber instead of doing what we need to do, which is making sure we have a functional government that provides for our families. When it comes to dysfunction, to all our witnesses here, you are now part of it. You came to this committee. They're overachievers when it comes to dysfunction. Why stop at destroying child care across our country? They're devastating public health, education, social safety nets in our country. And Ms. O'Connor, You are part of it now because you came here.
Chair,
So don't say that you're
ladies,
not part.
time's expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Burchett from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. President Biden has sent over $110 billion of taxpayers' hard-earned money to Ukraine and wants to send even more. Yet his son failed to pay any taxes on the millions of dollars he received from Ukrainian companies. Many folks in East Tennessee can't afford to buy even their dadgum groceries, let alone a home or an automobile. But these decent people and Americans all over the country still pay their taxes. The fact is, if your last name is Biden, you don't have to play by the same rules. Who's going to write the check for the money Hunter Biden didn't pay now that it's too late to bring charges to these taxpayers? Who's paying taxes on the $250,000 that China sent to President Biden's Delaware address? I'll tell you who. It's the hardworking Americans that got to get up every morning that don't come into work at 10 o'clock and take 2 hours for lunch and then walk out of here in their Brooks Brothers suit with their jacket thrown over their dadgum shoulder, claiming that they worked hard because they know they didn't work hard. The people back home are working hard and they're paying their dadgum taxes. Yet the Biden family doesn't have to. This past July, 2 high-level IRS agents, Gary Shapley and Joseph Ziegler, testified before our committee. They painted a very disturbing picture, worse than the one of Hunter Biden's paintings, by the way, of misconduct and obstruction within the Department of Justice criminal investigation of Hunter Biden and the Biden family business dealings. They testified that Hunter Biden should have been charged with a tax felony, not a misdemeanor. Hunter was saved by Merrick Garland's decision to change the department's long-standing policy to charge the most serious offense that can be proven. This paved the path for Hunter Biden to attempt to plead guilty for 2 tax-related misdemeanors rather than any of the 6 felonies recommended by the department's tax division. I've literally seen people in Tennessee be charged with more for traffic violations. Moreover, Mr. Garland's decision does not align with Chapter 10 of the Criminal Tax Manual, which prohibits prosecutors from allowing a defendant to plead to a misdemeanor when elements of a felony can be proven. David Weiss should have followed department policy and charged Hunter Biden with tax felonies. The Department of Justice should have ensured Hunter paid his back taxes just like any other person in this position. Hardworking Tennesseans shouldn't have to subsidize the Biden family's crime spree. I'd like to know that any of them paid any of their dadgum taxes. I yield the remainder of my time to my friend from Ohio, Jim Jordan.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Turley, I want to get back to what you said in your written statement about the abuse of power model that we've seen in other administrations and you think may exist here with this administration. I just want to look at the gentleman before me was just talking about the way the Justice Department ran the investigation into Hunter Biden. And some of the things we've learned from the whistleblowers were they were prevented from taking certain investigative steps. They couldn't interview the adult grandchildren of the president. They couldn't execute a search warrant on a storage unit without first tipping off the defense counsel. They couldn't use, in interviews they got to do, only a couple, they couldn't use the term big guy. They couldn't look at political figure 1, which we know is the big guy, is Joe Biden. They couldn't investigate tax years 2014 and 2015 because they let they couldn't charge for that, I should say, because they let the statute of limitations expire. Is it an abuse of power when the Biden Justice Department stops investigative steps that all potentially lead to Joe Biden?
It certainly can be if there's a linkage to the president. If you look back, I think Article 2 of the Nixon impeachment was an abuse of power provision that dealt with that type of nexus. Article 1, I think, of the Trump impeachment, I think, dealt with that type of nexus. So you just have to establish those linkages as you go forward in an inquiry to make an article to substantiate an article of impeachment.
I want you to elaborate on something you said earlier, too. I wrote it down. You said, confirmed corrupt influence peddling operation. Can you elaborate on what you think that entails? That's pretty strong words. You said the Biden influence peddling scheme was confirmed corrupt influence peddling operation.
I think that it's now, in my view at least, largely unassailable. Even people that have long been critical of some of the investigations have acknowledged recently, particularly after the Archer interview, that this was an influence peddling effort. Whether it was an illusion or not is part of the task for the inquiry. But it seems to me abundantly clear from these emails and statements and now sworn testimony that Hunter Biden and his associates were selling access to Joe Biden. And the question is whether any of that effort resulted in decisions and changes being made by Joe Biden, and also the degree to which he knew of it, directed it, encouraged it. That's all the subject of an inquiry that has to be determined. It can be disproven or proven, but that's what lays ahead of you.
Yep. I yield back to the gentleman. Appreciate the gentleman for yielding.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognize Ms. Porter from California.
Thank you very much, Mr. Comer. Mr. Dubinsky, do you believe that this impeachment inquiry has merit?
Again, I'm not a legal scholar. I'm a forensic accountant. I think from what I've seen, there's merit for the inquiry to look for other information now.
Okay, so I'm going to say yes, you believe the impeachment inquiry has merit.
Yes.
Ms. O'Connor, do you believe this impeachment inquiry is legitimate?
I don't know enough about the House rules and how things are supposed to work here to know whether it is or not.
Okay. Mr. Turley, do you agree? Do you think this impeachment inquiry has merit or is legitimate?
I do. I think that the House has passed the threshold for an inquiry. That's separate from the question of the articles of impeachment.
Thank you very much. A veteran of several impeachments said that an impeachment inquiry without a floor vote by the Congress would, quote, create a process completely devoid of any merit or legitimacy. Mr. Dubinsky, who said that?
I don't know.
Ms. O'Connor, who said this?
No clue.
Mr. Turley, who said this?
I made an objection along those lines to the earlier decision from Speaker Pelosi to go forward without a House vote, and I've made the same objection today, that I think the best practices in going forward is to do that. And what I've said in my testimony is that it's not required under the Constitution.
Correct.
So
Professor Turley, give me my time. I agree with you. We're not talking about whether it's required legally. I'm just asking you, can you say again for the committee, do you know who made this statement, and if so, who?
I don't. I've made an objection along those lines.
Give me my time. This quote is a statement from now Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Mr. Dubinsky, do you know the date of the House floor vote on this impeachment inquiry?
No, I don't think there was a House floor vote.
Ms. O'Connor, do you remember any House vote?
I have not been following that.
Professor Turley, was there a House vote on this impeachment inquiry?
And not that I know of.
So this House vote didn't happen. There has not been a House vote to move forward with this impeachment inquiry. So we haven't followed what the Speaker himself, Mr. McCarthy, has said is the process that we should be following so that an impeachment inquiry would have merit or legitimacy, which is something that I think all Americans on both sides of the aisle should expect investigations or inquiries like this to have. I think Americans should be able to expect that the things we do in this body have merit or legitimacy. Today, by having this hearing, Republicans have changed their tune. I think I know why Speaker McCarthy is going back on his conviction. His members are demanding an impeachment, but their months and months of investigating our president have not revealed yet any evidence that he himself has committed crimes. But Speaker McCarthy wants to keep his job, so he is set on delivering an impeachment inquiry, whether or not there is any evidence, and even if, in his own words, that impeachment inquiry would be devoid of any merit or legitimacy. Mr. Dubinsky, I have one final question. What is the title of this hearing?
The title was The Basis for an Impeachment Inquiry of President Joseph Biden.
But according to Speaker McCarthy, there isn't a legitimate or meritorious basis yet for this hearing. And no amount of noise on the other side of the aisle is going to change this. As Speaker McCarthy said, in his words, this impeachment inquiry is devoid of any merit or legitimacy. Wow, I just did it. At the very end of an extremely contentious hearing, I found something that Speaker McCarthy was correct about. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back, and I believe
Point of,
Ms.
I just have a unanimous consent request.
Okay.
Thank you. I request to submit to the record a Washington Post fact check that pointed out that the committee Republicans' own memo fails to support the claim about shell companies. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a point.
Without objection.
Mr.
So
Chair.
ordered.
I'm
Who's,
so
I
sorry.
don't, okay, Ms.
Yeah.
Tlaib.
I just want to submit for the record, if I may, article from Augusta Chronicle says government shutdown, Georgia military service members will see no pay.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes Ms. Boebert from Colorado for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe Biden had dinner with Hunter and his business associates, including Yelena Baturina, a Russian tech and energy oligarch who was married to the mayor of Moscow at the time. Hunter then received $3.5 million in payouts from Baturina. She was not sanctioned after the invasion of Crimea. Joe Biden has maintained for years that he was not involved in his son's business dealings. Yet we have proof that Joe Biden attended business dinners with his son while he was Vice President of the United States of America. Here you have an excerpt from Devin Archer's transcribed interview. On the screen, if we could get that up there. During his interview, Archer testified to the fact that on multiple occasions, then Vice President Joe Biden attended functions with business associates of his and Hunter Biden. One such example is laid out on the screen for us. Mr. Archer is explaining here that in the spring of 2014, if we could get this slide up, Devin and Hunter had dinner at Cafe Milano with several of their business associates. One of these attendees was Yelena Baturina. Ms. Baturina was, at the time, the richest woman in Russia, and she was married to the former mayor of Moscow, as previously stated. Interestingly, on February 14th, 2014, Ms. Baturina wired Hunter Biden and Devin Archer $3.5 million. It is still uncertain what legitimate service Hunter Biden provided to Ms. Baturina in exchange for this large sum of money, if any at all. Furthermore, it is concerning how Hunter Biden and Devin Archer moved this money from bank account to bank account. And it is also convenient that the U.S. government never placed Ms. Baturina on their public sanctions lists after Russia invaded Crimea. This billionaire continued to invade public sanctions lists even after Russia invaded Ukraine. I want these facts to be clear to the American people. The billionaire continued to evade the public sanctions lists after Russia invaded Ukraine. Joe Biden's attendance at this dinner shows that Joe Biden's involvement in Hunter Biden's deals was more than just the illusion of access. It was access. There were direct benefits leading to Hunter and his business partners after Joe's attendance at this Cafe Milano dinner. This pay-to-play type of engagement was selling direct access to Joe Biden and the office of the Vice President of the United States. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter to the record the third bank records memorandum produced by this committee on Oversight and Accountability on August 9th, 2023.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Turley, as an expert on constitutional issues and impeachment, where does selling access to an executive office fall in terms of what justifies an impeachment inquiry, and what is deemed an impeachable offense?
Well, it's two separate questions. What I've suggested is for the four areas for articles of impeachment that you can explore, you can look at some of the criminal code, and that includes things like bribery under 201, Hobbs, the Hobbs Act cases, and those have different standards that I think are relevant. In terms of the impeachable standard itself, there's been obviously decades of debate about that. I would hope that there would be general agreement that public corruption if the president engaged,
selling any access.
right, if
Yes.
if he engaged in public corruption involving
Any sort of
his
peddling of influence. Now, as a follow-up, in previous impeachment inquiries, have actions such as influence peddling and pay-to-play schemes like this been deemed as offensive to the conscience of the American people in such a way to warrant an investigation?
Well, I think that there's certainly a basis for this inquiry to go forward. My position is simply that this is early on in an inquiry in terms of linking these, which are still just allegations, to the president, and that's the linkage you have to establish.
Thank you, Mr. Turley. It is far time for Joe Biden to stop lying to the American people about his shady foreign business deals. He intentionally misled the American people by using complex maneuvers to pocket millions of dollars from our adversary. He lied when he was vice president. He lied as a candidate to gain the office of President of the United States. Now this committee has uncovered the truth, and it is time to impeach this compromised commander-in-chief. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
The lady yields back.
Chairman, point of order, if I could. I didn't want to interrupt the good gentlelady from Colorado, but you cannot engage in personalities against the President of the United States.
We've established that, Mr. Ranking Member.
Okay, and so you cannot say that Joe Biden lied. First of all, he didn't lie.
Mr. Ranking Member,
even if
we've
he had,
established this at the beginning of the hearing.
You can't say it, Mr. Chairman. I hope you agree with me.
This
is a ruling from your parliamentarian.
I
can provide you all the cases.
This reclaiming order. Chair now recognizes Mr. Ivey.
I have a unanimous consent motion before Mr. Ivey goes.
Mr.
I would like to reintroduce once again the Devin Archer transcript and especially point to when he says that Hunter
Mr.
Biden
Goldman,
was
Mr.
not
Goldman,
involved
we've re-entered it.
in the
This
Yelena
will be the fifth
Ballerina
time.
$3.5
Without
million.
objection, we've re-entered the Devin Archer transcript for the fifth time. Now, Chair recognizes Mr. Ivey from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the chance to let me weigh in today. Because it's such an important hearing. Mr. Turley, it's good to see you again. You should get office space here on the Hill, I think. This is our third or fourth committee hearing together. I do want to say this. Impeachment is one of the greatest powers that the Constitution gives to the House of Representatives. And I think it's important to make sure that we treat it with that level of esteem. But I think what's going on or has gone on here in the House for several months now is that power has been abused. And kicking off this hearing today, and I appreciate that the word probably used most today is if, because a lot of these statements are made in the forms of allegations, but with respect to connecting them to the president, that hasn't happened. There's a lot of, well, if this is true, then that. And I don't think that's sufficient to move forward at this point. I appreciate Mr. Turley's comment. I think you were saying before Ms. Boebert cut you off that it was early and that, Mr. Biden hadn't been linked at this point. I think that's true. He hasn't been linked to any of these allegations that have been raised. I did want to talk about a couple of them specifically. With respect to the prosecutor issue, the removal of Prosecutor General Shokin, a couple of points I want to make on that front. Key one, I think, is that the removal of Shokin was actually detrimental to Hunter Biden and Burisma, because it was pretty clear based on statements and testimony that's been given here in the House before these committees and in other instances that he was not doing a great job, to say the least. He was sitting on the investigation. He wasn't moving it forward. I think there have been statements that have been made with respect to the IMF pressuring to have him removed by threatening to withhold $40 billion in international assistance unless he was removed. President Biden's request to have him removed along those lines was actually consistent not only with what he pushed for, or the IMF pushed for, but what others were pushing for as well, including Senator Johnson, I believe, on that front. So what we've got here is an effort to argue by our Republican colleagues that the removal of this prosecutor, President Biden asking or pressing to have him removed, was in some way an effort to undermine an investigation for Burisma. But it's pretty clear, I think, based on, again, the testimony that we've received and that's been presented in Congress before and published in some of our documents, that that's the exact opposite. Things were moving forward, not moving forward with him there. They were more likely to move forward without him. And so there's really no linkage there between the president and derailing any kind of investigation. With respect to the Devon Archer statements, Devon Archer said he's confirmed that over his decade-long business relationship with Hunter Biden, he never heard Hunter Biden discuss business with his father, either on phone calls or in person. And I did want to add this as well. Mr. Biden's bookkeeper, Eric Schwerin, from 2009 to 2018, he was his bookkeeper, had access to his bank account, said that he had no knowledge of President Biden having any involvement in Hunter Biden's financial activities. With respect to the Weiss issue, and I know that's been an issue that's been pushed a lot too, that argument is that as you know, Weiss was derailing the investigation into Hunter Biden and slowing it down. You know, the key points on that obviously are the fact that Weiss was appointed by President Trump, and as Congressman Buck said a few days ago over in the Judiciary Committee hearings, if the president had removed Weiss when he first came into office, Republicans would have argued that that was an effort to derail the investigation against Hunter Biden. In fact, when the Attorney General testified, he noted that he had Senate Republicans who explicitly wanted him and sort of pressed for in their personal meetings that he promised not to remove Weiss or replace him. And we've had other testimony with respect to the FBI supervisors, the special agent who was in the SAC for the investigation, working with Mr. Weiss. Question, have you ever known U.S. Attorney Weiss to make prosecutorial decisions based upon political influence? Answer, no. Have you ever known any of the AUSAs in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Office of Delaware to let their prosecutorial decisions be guided by political interference? Answer, no. So I apologize for running over, but
Gentlemen, time's expired. Chair now recognizes
Another
Mr.
unanimous
Fry from South Carolina.
request, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to enter into the record a bipartisan letter signed by Senators Portman, Johnson, and Kirk urging Ukraine to remove Mr. Shokin because of his own corruption.
Without objection, so ordered. Mr. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor, you know, in a trial, there's an exchange of evidence back and forth. What we see here today, we've presented evidence. I mean, the other side is a lot of bluster and theatrics. And also in a trial, you have affirmative defenses. I think the only affirmative defenses that are coming from the other side is, one, Donald Trump, like the ultimate affirmative defense that you could just say his name and all wrongdoing is gone away. I mean, Lisa McClain talked about this earlier, that he is living in their head. I would also submit to you that he's tap dancing in their head because that's all that they talk about. The second affirmative defense, according to the Democrats, is this magical shutdown clock that they have. But would it surprise you that every single appropriations bill that has tried to come before the floor, they have voted? They don't want a debate on government funding. They want to shut down the government. This is the kind of stuff that they're doing. And of course, the third affirmative defense, as you well know at this point, is attack the witness. Right? You don't have the facts, you don't have the law, you have theatrics and you just go after the witness. It's like we live in amnesia, like they have this constant amnesia. We have statements from the ranking member about you don't need a vote on the floor, but that's what they talk about. You know, for the past 9 months, we've worked tirelessly to analyze all the evidence. Every single week, there's more evidence that drops. And this is despite the FBI. This is despite the DOJ. We have witness interviews, accounts of confidential human sources, whistleblower testimony. They haven't disputed that at all. Bank records, suspicious activity reports, text messages, WhatsApp messages. It's endless. And despite what my friends on the other side of the aisle may say, House Republicans have always held that this investigation should follow proper procedure and be done the right way, which is why we're here today. We know that Biden family members were complicit in and benefited from Hunter Biden's foreign business dealings. And as the lens begins to focus and as the evidence begins to mount, we uncover more and more about Joe Biden's involvement. Today, I want to focus on the FD 1023, a document that shows a conversation between a confidential human source and a Ukrainian business executive, Mykola Zlochevsky. Let's dive into a few key points. The source asked Zlochevsky about the Ukrainian prosecutor's investigation into Burisma. He replied, "Don't worry, Hunter will take care of all these issues through his dad." 2, although Hunter Biden was labeled as stupid, that the guy's dog was smarter than Hunter, the source was told in 2016 that Hunter Biden was brought onto Burisma's board to protect them. 3, big fact, Hunter and Joe Biden both told Zlochevsky that he should keep Hunter Biden on the board. And of course, he received $1 million a year. Point 4, after the election, Zlochevsky said it cost $5 million to pay one Biden and $5 million to another, meaning Joe Biden. And point 5, in 2019, Zlochevsky said he didn't send any funds directly to the big guy. Wonder what that means. We talked about that a lot today. Because according to Zlochevsky, it would take investigators 10 years to find the records of payments to Joe Biden's. If these allegations are true, and there's a reason why it was so hard to put together. This was done deliberately and on purpose. So we're here months later. We finally get this document released to the public. Mr. Turley, what in your eyes is the most serious allegation outlined in the FD 1023?
Well, first of all, I'm not someone that puts a great deal of emphasis on these types of field reports from sources. But this was not just any source. This was a source that was not just trusted, but it received considerable amount of money from the FBI and had a long track record. So it does come with that degree of support. What I think an inquiry has to do is to drill down on the 1023. There may be nothing there when you drill down, but there may be bribery. And of course, that's the second offense that is mentioned for impeachment. But what makes the 1023 concerning is the overall context. And this is one of the reasons why when Representative Goldman was asking me about bribery, it's a little more complex because you have Section 201, you've got the Hobbs Act, and you have all these cases that suggest that it is public corruption in a lot of different forms. So really, you're sort of at the water's edge here. Everything that has gone so far, from what I can see, has been tracking money from banks, often transnational transactions that have arrived at the United States. What we haven't seen is the back end of those transfers. To what extent can you track that money with regard to the Bidens themselves? And that, I suppose, will come out through an inquiry. But until you have those interstitial relationships, you don't quite know what you have.
Professor, how can we use this document and maybe other documents that we have to expand the case? And how pivotal do you think that this document is to the case?
Well, I think that in an inquiry, when someone who is trusted by the FBI suggests that there was actual bribery involving the president, you need to contact everyone involved, including the source for the 1023, but also this is secondhand information. So you're going to have to pursue the references made by that source, and you do it in good faith and to see if there's a there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Without a yield back.
Chair now
Mr.
recognizes
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion for unanimous consent.
For what?
Mr. Chairman, I ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record a Washington Post article titled "The Republican Case Against Biden Takes a Body Blow from Fox News because they failed to show any connection and their evidence is too far down the path to admit that they are wrong."
Without objection. Chair recognizes Mr. Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to start out by commenting, while this is not directly affecting this impeachment inquiry, I am so excited to have heard so many times from that side of the room how concerned folks are over keeping the government running, because you're all going to get a chance in just a few hours to put your money where your mouth is and vote on some bills that's going to keep the government funded. And I hope it's as important to you when you go to cast those votes as what you said that it is this afternoon. We've heard today that how many times Joe Biden has lied. He's lied about his role in his family's business dealings. We've also heard how in the White House he's struggled to keep up with new evidence about consistently shifted its messaging on President Biden's involvement in Hunter Biden's foreign business affairs. This summer, White House spokesperson Ian Sams shifted the White House's messaging to now claim that President Biden was never in business with his son. This is dramatically different than what we heard from the White House in their previous claims, where we were told that President Biden had no knowledge of Hunter Biden's business dealings. And yet again, the committee has revealed evidence that then Vice President Biden had direct knowledge of and involvement in Hunter Biden's foreign business dealings. Kenneth Rakishev is a Kazakhstani oligarch who was a director at Kazakhstan's state-owned oil company. Importantly, Rakishev maintains ties to Karim Mazemov, who became Prime Minister of Kazakhstan on April 2nd, 2014. On April 22nd, 2014, Rakishev wired $142,300 to an account associated with Hunter Biden, Rosemount Seneca Bohai. The next day, that same amount was sent to a car dealership in New Jersey for an expensive sports car for Hunter Biden. Around the same time as the payment for Hunter Biden's sports car, then Vice President Biden attended a dinner with Kenneth Rakishev, Karim Mazemov, Yelena Baturina, Hunter Biden, and Devin Archer at Cafe Milano in Washington, D.C. I believe that we have a photo of those here. There they are. And here, on another screen, we see a photograph with Mr. Mazemov on the right, standing with Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, along with Mr. Rakishev on the left. I don't know if that picture came up or not. Additionally, in April 2015, then Vice President Biden attended another dinner in Washington, D.C. with Prime Minister Mazemov, Hunter Biden, and Devin Archer. Clearly, Hunter Biden was selling the Biden brand and all the access and political favors that came along with it. This transcript, I believe we're going to see it come up on the screen, is taken from the committee's interview of Devin Archer earlier this summer. In this excerpt, Archer reveals that then Vice President Biden hosted Hunter Biden, Archer, and Mark Holtzman, who was then the chairman of Kazakhstan's largest bank, for breakfast at the Naval Observatory, where Holtzman discussed who was going to be the next UN Secretary General with Vice President Biden. Mr. Holtzman was lobbying for Karim Mazemov to receive the position. That meeting occurred on July 7th, 2015, shortly after Vice President had dined again with Mazemov at Cafe Milano in Washington, D.C. Was Mazemov trying to cash in? After all, a meeting with Vice President of the United States when trying to become UN Secretary just might be worth it for a sports car. And around that same time, Hunter Biden and Devin Archer were pursuing energy projects in Kazakhstan on behalf of the corrupted Ukrainian energy company Burisma, which was trying to expand its business into the country. This is another clear example of Hunter Biden peddling access to his father and Joe Biden participating in the influence peddling scheme. Hunter seeks business opportunities in a foreign country and provides access to and political favors through his father's office to get paid. Mr. Chair, I see I'm out of time, so I'll yield.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, no
Mr. Chair, I
record.
have a unanimous consent request.
Councilor
I
Porter.
seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a memorandum issued by staff of the Committee on Judiciary and Oversight explaining how the testimony of 5 senior IRS and FBI agents has been debunked.
Without objection, Chair recognizes Mr. Langworthy from New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For years, we have heard shifting denials and deflections from President Biden relating to his son's foreign business deals and ventures. In fact, we know that President Biden has lied to the American people at least 16 times about his family's business schemes. In August 2019, Joe Biden told reporters, quote, "First of all, I have never discussed with my son or my brother or anyone else anything having to do with their business, period." End quote. Joe Biden continued to double down on this statement throughout the 2020 presidential race. In September 2019, Joe Biden again stated, "I've never spoken to my son about his overseas business dealings." These lies continued throughout the 2020 presidential race. It was only recently that the Biden administration has grudgingly begun to shift their answer on what Joe Biden knew about his son's foreign business deals. In June of this year, the White House changed its position by claiming that the president was not in business with his son. Moreover, media and members across the aisle continue to run cover for President Biden, repeatedly shifting the goalpost and repeatedly peddling the notion that Hunter Biden was selling the, quote, illusion of access. Evidence discovered by this committee in its investigation into the Biden brand, however, has revealed Hunter's product went well beyond illusions of access. On display is an example of actual access to the then vice president. During his transcribed interview, Devin Archer was questioned about how many times Hunter Biden had put his father on speakerphone while in business meetings. Now, Archer made it clear during this whole 10-year partnership that Joe Biden was on speakerphone maybe 20 times while Archer was present. And when later interviewed by Tucker Carlson, Archer went on to say, if you're sitting with a foreign business person and then you hear the voice of the vice president, that's prize enough. That's pretty impactful stuff. Archer later stated, in the rear view, it's an abuse of soft power. Now, President Biden's involvement in Hunter's business deals was not overt. Joe Biden did not email Hunter asking for Burisma's quarterly reports. All it takes for Biden to be involved in Hunter's business dealings is Biden crafting and implementing policy based on promptings from his son and receiving payment in return. Mr. Turley, have you ever had your parents call in during an official business meeting?
No.
Okay. Members across the aisle have characterized Hunter's speakerphone calls during business meetings as, quote, casual conversation and niceties about the weather and what's going on. Now, during a business meeting, have you ever answered a call from a parent or put them on speaker and then proceeded to discuss the weather?
Not in my case, no.
Okay. Would you say that such actions are generally out of the ordinary in the business world?
I couldn't speak for the whole business world, but it strikes me as being odd.
Yeah. Looking at the evidence like this transcript of Devin Archer's testimony and other evidence discussed in today's hearings, can you contrast the level of thoroughness of this committee's investigation compared with the Democrats' impeachment inquiry in 2019?
Well, I was highly critical of obviously the Trump impeachment and the first Trump impeachment, which I felt did not develop a sufficient record to support the articles. I actually said that the investigation had merit to go forward, but that they hadn't established the basis for the articles. In the second impeachment, they used what I call the snap impeachment. They jettisoned any hearing at all, which I think did do damage to the impeachment process.
Now, looking at this transcript of Devin Archer's sworn testimony, would you agree that there are inconsistencies with President Biden's statements that he never discussed business with his son, or even later that he was not in business with his son?
Well, I think my understanding is that Devin Archer himself was asked that question and said that it was patently false to suggest that President Biden was not aware of his son's business dealings.
Very good. And Mr. Chairman, I would yield back any time to you.
Mr. Chairman, over here. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this article by the New York Post dated September 14th, 2023. House GOP probing then Vice President Biden's dodgy breakfast meeting with Kazakh bank official at official residence, showing Vice President Joe Biden taking meetings at the Vice President's residence with his son's business partners.
Ms. O'Connor, I assume you've had time to review and hopefully the bank memorandums and the evidence of, that we derive from the suspicious activity reports about the various bank reports that allege money laundering, allege receiving wires from state-owned entities and things like that. How does that, what kind of crimes are we talking about there, and how often do you run across people, even the most criminal people, who have 170 suspicious activity reports?
Well, there was more than, or about 700 pages worth of documents that you released yesterday. I haven't looked at them all carefully. But one factor that continues to be overlooked is the fact that in tax law there is a concept of constructive receipt. If I owe you $100, but I don't want to pay you directly, I don't want any sort of trace, but I know that Representative Jordan pays your bills, I will pay him knowing that he's going to take care of you. But you have constructive receipt of that money from me. And I think that if the special agents were able to follow the leads that they wanted to develop, they would develop a lot of information that you'd be interested in.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I have another unanimous consent request.
Go ahead.
Just to clarify, because Mr. Langworthy said that it was the Democrats who said that that Joe Biden and Hunter Biden talked about the weather.
Point of order. Is that a point of order?
I would just like to
Point of order.
introduce the Devin Archer
Point of order.
testimony where he says
Look,
they talked about the weather 6 times.
Point of order.
Recognize Mr. Biggs.
Yes, my point of order is that is not.
That is not a point of order. You are correct.
Well,
you are correct. The gentleman from Arizona is correct. Chair will now.
Unanimous consent request.
Who's that now? Do you have a unanimous consent?
Yes, to reintroduce those 6 pages of testimony from Devin Archer where he said they talked about the weather.
For the 7th time without objection.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Burleson.
You could have just called him and we would have been able to question him.
Well, as you know, he's headed to prison.
Chair recognizes Mr. Burleson. Who was that Mr. Biggs? Okay. Do you have a point of order? All right. Chair now recognizes Mr. Burleson from Missouri.
Thank you, Professor Turley. Could you tell me, would it be illegal or certainly unethical for elected officials to utilize the resources in their office, utilize their staff to financially benefit their family member's business or their own?
They would. Part of the problem with the reason I think the illusion defense is sort of illusory is that if the president was involved in that influence peddling scheme, it would still involve using his office as a commodity for corruption, right?
Yes.
Even if you didn't follow forward. And I think that itself would become an issue of public corruption we'd have to discuss.
Thank you. In fact, on multiple occasions, he claimed that he was not involved in his family business dealings. However, the work of this committee, the reports that we've had from the Treasury Department, suspicious activity reports, the IRS testimony, all tell a different story, all from different sources. And even his own staff didn't get the memo that they weren't supposed to communicate with his son's business. This email, dated December 4th, 2015, shows that Vice President Biden, through his communications staff director, Kate Bettenfield, coordinated a response to reporters when they questioned about the conflict of his involvement with Ukraine and his son's involvement with Burisma. She coordinated with not just Hunter, but Hunter Biden's business associate, Eric Schwerin. Okay? Why is the staff of the President of the United States communicating with a business associate for the president's son? Mr. Schwerin, who served as the executive Hunter Biden's Rosemont Seneca advisors, was intimately involved in the Biden family business dealings. And he visited Joe Biden's residence 36 times while he was vice president. So in this email exchange, he actually says to her, "Will you call me when you get a chance? I'm in the office or on my cell. And 47 minutes later, this email that was seen on the screen was sent, and the email clearly was a coordination of talking points between the president's office and the business. In fact, what's really striking is that this interaction occurred on the same day. Wait, back up. So the other thing that's really interesting to note is not only did they have an interaction, but in the email it says the VP signed off on this. The VP signed off on the shared communication. The timeline of this is that this occurred on this very same day that the board of Burisma had requested Hunter to help alleviate pressure that it was facing from the prosecutor Shokin's investigation. Let's turn to another email. We have a staff member from Vice President Biden's office emailing Joe Biden about a scheduled call with Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko. Not only was this email sent to, which I think found strange, to Robert L. Peters. We all would think that that would be strange, that Biden is using that alias. But the more strange thing about this email is who is CC'd in the email. Hunter Biden. And not just his personal email, his business email account. So you have, again, a staff person coordinating a meeting with the president and using those resources to coordinate that with Biden's business. So if our president is believed to whenever he says he was not involved in his son's business ventures, then why is his son copied on the email? Mr. Chairman, I ask, before I forget, that these emails be added to the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
What the American people need to be asking is the question, why in the world would the vice president coordinate with a business associate of Hunter Biden? Why would he direct his staff to coordinate with the business associate of Hunter Biden? And why does Hunter Biden need his father's approval to sign off on alleged separate business dealings? And why would President Biden lie about his involvement within his family's international business dealings? The analogy that was made before about Hunter using his father's car to get a speeding ticket is an absurd analogy. A more accurate one would be Hunter, if Joe Biden threatened the job of the prosecutor or the officer who is issuing the speeding ticket to his son. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and our last questioner is Mr. Armstrong from North Dakota.
We spend all day long talking about evidence and proof and different definitions and all of those different things, and we spend the days talking about unconditional love for sons and addiction, all of these different issues. But I think we miss one of the points in that this was going on for years, and this was going on for years with various different companies during the course of Joe Biden's vice presidency, after his vice presidency, and at least during his candidacy for president. I'm going to use one example out of many. In 2015, Hunter Biden and James Bardard started working with CEFC, which is a Chinese energy company with direct ties to the Chinese Communist Party. Now, there's evidence that they delayed payment until after Joe Biden was no longer vice president, so as to assume no appearance of impropriety. In 2017, after Joe Biden left office, Hunter wants to get paid by the Chinese Communist Party. And in July 4th of 2017, there is a meeting in Moscow between Vladimir Putin and President Xi where the chairman of the CEFC, which is a Chinese energy party, was present. And it's talking about a large-scale oil and gas purchase of a company called Rosneft by the Chinese Communist Party. Now, on July 30th of 2017, there's a text with Hunter Biden and the members of CEFC. And that text reads, "If I get a call or text from anyone involved other than you, Zhang, or the chairman, I will make certain that between the man sitting next to me and every person he knows and my ability to forever hold a grudge, that you will regret not following that direction." The people he's talking in, this guy disappeared. He's either been killed or he has not been seen since 2018. That is true. And on August 3rd, there's another text. And I'm tired of this, Kevin. I can make $5 million in salary at any law firm in America. If you think this is about money, it's not. The Bidens are the best I know at doing exactly what the chairman wants from this partnership. Please do not quibble over peanuts. We've talked about influence peddling. We've talked about all of this. This is a shakedown. Like, we can use whatever terms we want. This is a threat. And they believed it because the next day they sent $100,000. Do you think they were scared of Hunter Biden? I don't know. I think we should find out. And it matters because on 9/17 of the same year, there is a deal done between the Chinese Communist Party and Russia for a 17% sale of Rosneft. And we continue to go through all of those things. And now, finally, in December of 2018, over a year later, there's another text. So we're not talking about a speeding ticket, Mr. Gerhardt. We're just not. You're right, Hallie, and I find myself, because I've chosen to alienate all of my friends and family and employees, and you and the kids and my kids, et cetera, very alone in dealing with rebuilding an income that support an enormous alimony and my kids and costs and myself, dealing with the aftermath of the abduction and likely assassination, that's what the New York Times suspects, of my business partner, the richest man in the world. The arrest and conviction of my client, the chief of intelligence of the People's Republic of China by the US government, the retaliation of the Chinese in the ouster and arrest of a US suspected CIA operative inside China, my suspected involvement in brokering a deal with Vladimir Putin directly for the largest sale of oil and gas assets inside Russia to China, a tax bill that left Eric left hanging over my head, and oh, by the way, my dad is running for president. Mr. Turley, given the evidence we have, would the next step in this investigation be to subpoena Hunter Biden or James Biden's bank records?
Yes, in my testimony, I do warn the committee that once you proceed along the impeachment, the Constitution is on your side, but the calendar is not. You have to quickly determine if this information is going to be withheld so that you can seek judicial review. And that's one of the things that I encourage you to do so that you certainly you should not tarry in an impeachment inquiry.
Ms. O'Connor, you agree with that?
Completely. I wish I could have said it as well.
Mr. Dublinsky, you're a forensic accountant. Would you like to see those bank records?
Absolutely.
Here's the thing, and this is the bottom line. If the Vice President Biden knew or helped or engaged in any conduct that in any way, while he knew his son was involved in, that was helping move forward the interests of Russia and China, our two strategic adversaries on the world stage, the American people deserve to know. If the former Vice President was doing the same thing or knew his son was doing it or helped in any meaningful way, the American people deserve to know. And if the presidential candidate for the Democratic Party in 2019 knew about any of those things, the American people deserve to know. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'll now yield to Ranking Member Raskin for a brief closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Online, everybody's making fun of this Seinfeld impeachment, an impeachment hearing about nothing, apparently, 2 days before the government is about to shut down. But I want to say that all four of these witnesses have done a great service for us, not just the Republicans, but for the Democrats, too. And I want to thank them for their patience and their intellectual honesty and their surprising consensus on the key questions today. This process might not be such a whipping post, Mr. Chairman, if we heard from actual fact witnesses, which is why I'm so dismayed by the party line vote, not to call Rudy Giuliani or Lev Parnas to testify. Now, if the majority is abandoning the Ukraine Burisma theory, which used to be the heart of the investigation as I understood it, then clearly we don't need them. But if you're not abandoning that, we absolutely need to hear from them. It's not the complete absence of fact witnesses that troubles us so much today. It's the complete absence of facts. When I started out as a young assistant attorney general, I went to court. I remember on my first day of work, and I heard a judge lecture a lawyer by saying, "Counsel, you have forgotten the very first rule of being a lawyer, which is when you go to court, don't forget to bring the evidence with you." And I'm afraid the majority forgot to bring the evidence with them today. And our GOP colleagues are frustrated, and I know why. Their own witnesses don't agree with them. At least a dozen GOP members on that side of the aisle on the committee have already called for impeachment of Donald Trump. And yet these three expert witnesses called by the majority have all agreed that there is not a sufficient quantum of evidence that would justify impeachment of President Biden. And, it's not Professor Turley's fault. He's a constitutional law professor. I don't know if they looked across the country for other constitutional law professors. I don't think you could find one who would say that there's a sufficient quantum of evidence. Maybe John Eastman, but I think he may be detained these days. The fact is that this hearing has been dominated by the word if, as many people have said. It's been filled with hypotheticals. And I'm a law professor, so I'm not averse to them. Imagine a world without hypotheticals. But you don't impeach a president based on hypotheticals and based on obsolete conspiracy theories. Finally, Mr. Chair, I just want to say we've talked a lot about Ukraine today, kind of elusively, indirectly. We've talked about the beleaguered Burisma theory. We've talked about Rudy Giuliani and Lev Parnas and their travels there. We've talked about the Ukraine shakedown. But while we were debating all of this and mentioning Ukraine, there was a very important debate going on in the House floor, because the Republican majority in the House Rules Committee has advanced an amendment to delete $300 million from the Defense Appropriation Act, which will go to provide military and strategic security assistance to the people of Ukraine who are struggling to defend themselves against Vladimir Putin's bloody invasion and imperialist attack on their national sovereignty and on the rule of law there. That war has involved mass kidnapping of children, and I would love to hear from some of our friends on the other side of the aisle with QAnon talk about the actual kidnapping of children that's taking place in Ukraine today, mass rape of women and girls, and mass civilian atrocities, bombing of civilian residences, schools, hospitals, and so on. And yet the pro-Trump, pro-Putin elements in the MAGA caucus, and I know that doesn't apply to everybody on the other side of the aisle, thank God, and I appreciate everything Ken Buck has been doing. These people are trying to cut funding for our democratic allies in Ukraine. And so the assault that began on Ukraine with Donald Trump's Ukraine shakedown, holding up security and strategic assistance to them until he lied about Joe Biden, that continues to this day in their efforts to cut off military and economic assistance to the people of Ukraine. We will be fighting that. I hope that we will be able to get separate legislation, and then the MAGA caucus won't have to vote for it. But in any event, the question of Ukraine is a very serious one, and everybody who stands up for democracy, freedom, and the rule of law has got to be on the side of the people of Ukraine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back to you.
Gentleman yields back. One thing I didn't hear from my friends across the aisle in their never-ending defense of the Bidens is what exactly the Biden family did to receive the $20 million. Not one thing. Today's hearing title is the basis for an impeachment inquiry of President Joseph R. Biden. My Democrat colleagues have used this hearing to talk about impeachment, not an inquiry, but actual articles of impeachment. We aren't talking about impeachment today, and they know that. Unlike Democrats' investigations, this committee, under my leadership, does not launch investigations based on predetermined conclusions. We have entered an impeachment inquiry because, as our witnesses have testified, the evidence justifies that. This is how an investigation is supposed to work. I know that some are confused about congressional investigations because Democrat investigations in the past have been about saying a conclusion first and cherry-picking evidence to fit that narrative. The bottom line is that the committee has shown the Bidens alone have brought in over $15 million in their foreign influence peddling, over $24 million if you account for their associates' earnings from the schemes. We have established in the first phase of this investigation where this money has come from: Ukraine, Romania, Russia, Kazakhstan, China. It didn't come from selling anything legitimate. It largely went unreported to the IRS. It was funneled through shell companies and third parties to hide the Biden's fingerprints. This deserves investigation. This deserves accountability. The American people expect this committee to investigate public corruption. Now, we know much of the money goes to Hunter Biden, Haley Biden, James Biden, Sarah Biden, other Biden family members and their business entities. What we need to understand is where it goes next. That is the question this committee seeks to answer, and the evidence supports that next step. Joe Biden showed up, met with, ate with, talked with, shook hands with, and had meetings with, including in the White House, the foreign individuals sending millions of dollars to his family who sold access to him. This was no illusion of access. They got access. My Democrat colleagues wanted to spend this hearing defending the president against an impeachment that is not announced. I do wonder if they have predetermined the president's level of participation in these schemes. 2 days ago, this committee revealed a wire for over $250,000 was sent to Joe Biden's home address. As of yesterday, we know Joe Biden was named on a search warrant that was quashed by a Department of Justice employee. For my colleagues to say there is no evidence of Joe Biden's involvement is not only wrong, but it fails to acknowledge that investigators have been shut down when attempting to explore avenues that led to the president. That's what the Ways and Means Committee released yesterday. The witnesses today have all identified the evidence the committee has uncovered as deserving further inquiry. And that is what this committee will do, no matter where that evidence leads. I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony today. It confirms the evidence compiled by this committee justifies the investigation of Joe Biden's role in his family's international business schemes and justifies the next step of this investigation. One of those steps is gaining insight into where the Biden's foreign money ended up, for what purposes. Therefore, today, I will subpoena the bank records of Hunter Biden, James Biden, and their affiliated companies. And with that, I yield the remainder of my time to Chairman Jordan.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. In his deposition, Hunter Biden's business partner was asked this fundamental question. The request was help. This is the request from Burisma. The request was help from the United States government to deal with the pressure they were under from their prosecutor. Mr. Archer's response, correct. Later question, a few minutes later, what did Hunter Biden do after he was given this request? Mr. Archer's response, he called his dad, someone pretty important in the United States government, which then begs the obvious question. What did his dad do? He gets a request from Burisma. He called his dad. What does his dad do? 5 days later, he gets on a plane, he flies to Ukraine, and he starts the process of firing that prosecutor. That is why Mr. Turley said earlier that this is a confirmed corrupt influence peddling effort. He thinks that's what Joe Biden engaged in. And oh, by the way, that all happened even though the Obama administration had just written the prosecutor general a few months earlier and said, we're impressed with the ambitious reform and anti-corruption agenda of your government. Wrote the very guy Joe Biden decides to do it. And you know what he did? He decided on the plane. He decided on the plane. Read the Washington Post. September 15th, on the plane, Joe Biden called an audible, quoted. He called it, it was time for a bigger punch. The loan guarantee was the main point of leverage, Professor Gerhardt. He used the money of the people I represent in the 4th District of Ohio to help his family. And anyone with a brain can see that. That was the point of leverage, the vice president declared. So instead, he would tell Poroshenko the loan would not be forthcoming until Shokin was gone. And guess what? They didn't stop there. They made sure the next prosecutor dropped the charges against the very guy who requested this all to happen in the first place, Zolochevsky, the head of Burisma. That is the case. That is the case. That's why the chairman wants the bank records. That's why we're doing the impeachment inquiry. It can't get plainer and simpler than that. And it all happened. It all happened in that 5 days. He gets the request, he calls his dad calls the audible, uses our money to leverage the change. That's what took place. And again, I think anyone with common sense can see it. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back as a housekeeping measure from last week's markup on HRs 4428, 4984, 5040, 5527, 5528, and the en bloc postal package pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I ask the committee members have the right to file with the clerk of committee supplemental, additional minority, and dissenting views without objection. Additionally, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes to the bills subject to the approval of the minority without objection, so ordered. In closing, again, I want to thank our panelists once again for their important and insightful testimony today. With that and without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and to submit additional written questions for the witnesses, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for their response. If there is no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty clear where they're going. By the way, I don't agree with that.
What happened, didn't they?
What they
They were coming. The problem is all the stuff we were talking about today.
One, two.